I didn't fight back. I didn't scream. I just picked up the box they'd packed for me and walked out the front door while it was still raining. That was the last thing they expected. They wanted a scene. They wanted me to beg, to cry, to promise I'd fix everything. Instead, I pulled my jacket tighter, stepped off the porch, and didn't look back once. I was 22 years old. My stepmother had just told me that my father's will was none of my business. My half-brother stood behind her with his arms crossed, not saying a word. The house behind me, the house I'd grown up in, the house my father had built with money from 30 years of work. That house was no longer mine to stand in. I remember the exact feeling of the wet pavement under my sneakers. I remember the sound of the door closing behind me. Not a slam, just a soft click. Like I didn't even deserve a door slamming. My father passed on a Tuesday in late October. I remember because the leaves were at their peak that year, all red and gold, and I kept thinking it was a strange kind of beautiful for such a hard week. He went quickly, a stroke, then another, and then nothing. He was 64. I was holding his hand when it happened. My stepmother Lorraine had been in his life for 11 years. She was efficient and composed, and she wore a lot of beige. She was not cruel exactly. Not when my father was alive. She was the kind of woman who kept score quietly and said nothing until she had all the cards. My half-brother Brandon, her son from her first marriage, whom my father had legally adopted, was 31 and had lived rent-free in my father's basement for 4 of those years. He worked in sales, or said he did. He drove a truck my father had co-signed on. I was my father's only biological child. He never talked much about his will. I didn't push it. He was 64, not 84. I thought we had time. I thought there would be a conversation. I thought there would be something more than a Tuesday in October. The attorney's office was in a beige building in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which felt appropriate. We sat across a long table, Lorraine and Brandon on one side, me on the other. The attorney, a quiet man named Mr. Aldridge, read the document in a flat, careful voice. The house to Lorraine. The retirement accounts to Lorraine. The savings, split between Lorraine and Brandon. A personal effects bequest to me. Personal effects. My father's watch. A box of photographs. And a fishing rod he'd had since 1987. I sat very still. I looked at the table. I did not cry in that room. Lorraine reached across to pat my hand afterward like she was consoling me at a funeral reception and said, "Your father loved you very much, sweetheart." She had a small, careful smile. Brandon looked at his phone. I drove home to my apartment, a 1-bedroom in a complex off Route 15, and I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time. I thought about calling someone. I didn't know who. My best friend was in Seattle. My mother had been out of the picture since I was 9. I had cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, so I went inside. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and I thought, okay. Now what? Now what turned out to be a lot of things. I had been working in payroll administration at a mid-sized logistics company. Not glamorous, not even particularly interesting, but I was good at it, and I was quiet about being good at it, which had always served me well. Numbers made sense to me. Systems made sense to me. People lying about money was something I had gotten very good at detecting. Because when you process payroll for 300 employees, you start to see patterns everywhere. 6 months after my father died, I took a certification exam in forensic accounting. I passed on the first try. My supervisor, a tired man named Mr. Castellano, who had been at the company for 26 years, pulled me into his office and told me I was wasted in payroll. He helped me apply for an internal transfer to the compliance team. I took a small pay cut for 6 months. Then I got a raise that more than made up for it. I'm not going to make this sound like a montage. It wasn't. There were nights I ate cereal for dinner because I'd forgotten to go to the grocery store. There were weekends I didn't leave my apartment because the weight of things felt too heavy to move through. There was one winter, the second one after my father died, where I cried every Sunday morning for about 3 months straight, for no reason I could name. I'd wake up, make coffee, sit on the couch, and cry. Then I'd shower and get on with my day. Grief is not linear and it is not pretty, and it does not resolve itself into a lesson in a tidy way. I want to be honest about that. But I kept working, I kept studying. I started freelancing on the side. Small businesses, independent contractors, people who suspected something was wrong in their books but couldn't articulate what. Word got around. By the time I was 27, I was billing more on the side than I was making at my full-time job. By 28, I went independent. By 31, I had 3 long-term corporate clients, a small office I rented near downtown, and a junior associate I'd hired out of a local university. I had a savings account with a number in it that would have been unimaginable to the woman who sat in her car in a parking lot in Harrisburg at 22. I did not call Lorraine or Brandon during any of this. I did not attend the family Christmas that first year, or any year after. I sent a card when Lorraine's mother passed because my father would have wanted me to. I didn't hear back. That was fine. The thing about building a life quietly is that you stop waiting for people to notice. You stop needing them to. You just build it. There was a man for a while. His name was Theo, and he was kind and patient and completely wrong for me in ways I didn't understand until much later. We were together for 2 years. When it ended gently, which was somehow harder than a fight would have been. He moved to Portland. I stayed. We texted occasionally for a while and then didn't. I hope he's doing well. The colleague who became my closest friend during those years was a woman named Anita, who had grown up in a household not unlike mine, a step-parent who arrived and rearranged the furniture of the family without asking anyone's permission. We used to go to a diner near the office on Friday afternoons and talk until they needed our table for the dinner rush. She is the kind of person who tells you the truth without making you feel like you've been corrected. I'm grateful for her in a way I don't always know how to say out loud. It was Anita, actually, who told me what I needed to do with the one thing had been bothering me since my father's death, his watch. My father wore the same watch for as long as I could remember. A simple steel one, nothing fancy. But he told me once, I was maybe 16, sitting next to him at a baseball game in the July heat, that when he died, the watch was mine. He said it the way people say things they assume will never need to be documented, the casual, permanent certainty of it. When I'm gone, that watch is yours. I had never forgotten it. The watch was in the box they'd left me. I wore it sometimes. But there was something else he told me. Something I hadn't thought about in years until Anita asked me, one Friday afternoon over coffee, whether my father had ever mentioned a separate account. He had. Once. When I was in college during one of our weekend phone calls. He'd mentioned that he'd opened a separate account a long time ago, a CD, a certificate of deposit that he'd started when I was born and kept rolling over. He'd mentioned it the way you'd mention a small thing. There's some money set aside for you. I'd said something like, okay, thanks Dad, and moved on to talking about a professor I was annoyed with. I was 20 years old. I didn't write it down. I had assumed it was included in whatever came through probate. I had assumed it was part of what I hadn't received. Anita asked me a simple question. Had I ever actually checked? I had not actually checked. It took me 4 months to track it down. A CD opened in 1993 at a small community bank that had since been acquired twice over, most recently by a regional bank headquartered in Pittsburgh. My name, my full legal name as my father had written it on the original account, was the sole beneficiary. Not Lorraine. Not Brandon. Not part of the estate at all because my father had designated me directly on the account. The amount with 30 years of interest and rollovers was not enormous by the standards of what I had built for myself by then. But it wasn't nothing. And more than a number, there was the fact of it, the fact that my father had opened that account the year I was born and kept it there, quietly, for 30 years and made sure my name was on it. I sat in my car outside the Pittsburgh bank branch, because apparently I processed major moments in parking lots, and I thought about my father at 26, opening a small account for the daughter who hadn't even been born yet. I thought about him rolling it over every few years, not mentioning it again, keeping it tucked away. He knew. I think he knew, on some level, that Lorraine and Brandon would need to be worked around. I think that account was his quiet way of making sure I had something that couldn't be contested. I cried in that parking lot. Just a few minutes. Then I dried my face, called Anita, and told her she was a genius. The call from Lorraine came on a Saturday morning in March. I was at my kitchen table with coffee and a stack of quarterly reports when my phone rang, and I almost didn't answer it because I didn't recognize the number. It was a Pittsburgh area code. I picked up. "This is Lorraine," she said. And there was a pause, and she said my name the way someone says a name when they've been rehearsing the conversation. I kept my voice even. Hi, Lorraine. She wanted to meet for lunch. She said they'd been thinking about me. She said that enough time had passed. She said that Brandon was getting married in the fall and that family being together would mean a lot to him. I noticed she said family being together and not you being there. She'd always been precise with language in ways that were designed to sound like warmth. I told her I'd think about it. I called Anita. Anita said, "Do you want to go?" I thought about it for a moment. I said, "Not particularly, no." But I was curious. I'd learned a long time ago to pay attention to curiosity. I agreed to lunch. I chose a restaurant, a quiet place I knew, with good sight lines and a parking lot I could exit easily. I arrived 10 minutes early and had water on the table when they came in. Lorraine looked older, which was inevitable. Brandon looked the same, which was somehow worse. He was wearing a sport coat and a rehearsed expression of goodwill. They sat down. There were pleasantries. There was the performance of a family reconnecting after time away, and then Brandon put his hands flat on the table and said they knew about the CD. Not just knew, they'd found out when the original bank transferred records and a notification had gone out. A clerical detail that had made its way to Lorraine to an account tied to the estate. They hadn't known about it before. Now they did. Brandon said, carefully, that there might be grounds to challenge the beneficiary designation, that an attorney had indicated it was worth exploring, that they weren't looking for a fight. He paused here in a way that was meant to seem reasonable. They were just hoping I'd consider, given everything, being fair. Being fair. I looked at him across the table. I looked at Lorraine. I thought about the October Tuesday and the beige attorney's office and the hand pat and the fishing rod. I thought about my father at 26, opening a small account at a community bank and writing my name on it. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. "Brandon," I said, "your attorney gave you bad information. A beneficiary designation on a CD is a non-probate transfer. It doesn't go through the estate. There's nothing to challenge." Brandon looked at Lorraine. Lorraine said, "We just thought—" "I know what you thought," I said, not unkindly. Just clearly. I set my water glass down. "Your attorney," I said, "if they actually told you it was challengeable, either didn't do basic research or told you what you wanted to hear. If you want a second opinion, you're welcome to get one. It'll lead you to the same place." There was a silence at the table. Brandon said, "We're not trying to make this adversarial." "I know," I said. "You're trying to make it seem like I should feel guilty for having something my father specifically designated to me in writing 30 years ago. Those aren't the same thing." Lorraine's expression did something complicated. The careful composure shifted just slightly, and underneath it was something I recognized. Not remorse exactly, but the look of someone recalculating. I told them I wished Brandon well in his marriage. I meant that part, actually. His choices about who to marry were not my problem. I left enough cash on the table to cover the water and got up. I drove home. I changed into something comfortable. I sat on my couch with Anita on the phone and told her everything. She laughed. Then she said, "I'm proud of you." I thought about what I wanted to do with the money from the CD. I've been thinking about it since I found out, turning it over like a stone I kept picking up and putting down. I could invest it, add it to my firm's operating account, use it as a deposit on a condo I'd been considering on the edge of the city. In the end, I used part of it to set up a small scholarship at the university where I'd gotten my accounting degree. Not a large one, enough to cover books and fees for one student a year, renewable, preference given to first-generation students. I named it after my father. Not after the family name, not after anything that tied it to a house in Harrisburg or a beige attorney's office. Just his first name. Robert. He was a man who opened a small account the year I was born and never mentioned it again. He was a man who made sure that no matter what happened, there was something with my name on it. That deserved to be remembered correctly. I still have the watch. I wear it on days when I need to remember who taught me to be patient. It's nothing fancy, a simple steel one, a little worn on the strap. People ask about it sometimes, in meetings or over dinners, and I say it was my father's. They say that's sweet. I say yes, it was. I think about what I would say to the version of myself who stood in the rain outside that house at 22 with a cardboard box and wet sneakers. I think about what she needed to hear. I don't think she needed advice. I think she already knew everything she needed to know. She just needed time to grow into it. There were people who showed up during those years: Anita, Mr. Pent, Castellano, the professor who wrote me a recommendation letter I'd never asked for, the first client who referred me to another client and said simply, "She's the best I've ever worked with." None of those people were required to do anything for me. They did it anyway. That's the thing about losing one version of family. You realize that the word family is a category and the people you put in it are a choice. Brandon and Lorraine are not people I hate. Hating them would require investing in them, and I stopped doing that a long time ago. They are just people who made a calculation about what mattered, and I was not on the right side of it. I hope they're fine. I genuinely don't think about them much. But I think about my father. I think about him a lot. I think about him a lot. I think about the baseball game in July. I think about the weekend phone calls. I think about a young man at a community bank, filling out a form, writing down his daughter's name, and thinking, she'll need this. I don't know when, but she'll need this. He was right. I used to think that what happened after he died was the story. The will, the attorney's office, the box in the rain. I used to tell it that way in my head, as a story about what was taken from me. I don't tell it that way anymore. What happened after he died was that I found out what I was made of. Not because anyone believed in me, or helped me, or gave me a head start, because I had no other option except to find out, and what I found out was that I was the kind of person who could build something real, quietly, without an audience, and without anyone's permission. That's not a tragedy. That's actually the best thing that ever happened to me. The watch ticks the same as it always did. The scholarship applications come in every spring. My office is small and my work is good, and on Friday afternoons, I still sometimes go to the diner with Anita and talk until they need the table. That's enough. That is genuinely completely enough. People always want to know what the turning point was. They want a single moment, a door slamming, a phone call, a number on a bank statement, something they can point to and say, that's where everything changed. But that's not how it worked. There was no single moment. There were just a lot of small choices made quietly over a long time with no one watching. I've thought a lot about what Lorraine and Brandon actually cost me, and I think the honest answer is not as much as they intended to. They took what was on paper. They could not touch what wasn't. They couldn't take the work ethic my father modeled every time he got up early and came home late. They couldn't take the stubbornness I inherited from him, the kind that doesn't announce itself, just keeps moving. They couldn't take the account he opened the year I was born because he'd made sure of that himself. That's the thing about people who operate purely from calculation. They understand assets. They don't understand character. Lorraine looked at my father's estate and saw line items. She never understood that the most valuable thing he left me wasn't in the will. I don't say that to be sentimental. I say it because it's practically true. The skills I built during those years, the certifications, the clients, the reputation, none of that came from an inheritance. It came from having no other option, from being the person who had to figure it out. That pressure either breaks you or sharpens you, and I got lucky that it sharpened me. What I know about integrity now, I learned the hard way. It's not a value you hold when things are going well. It's the thing that holds you when things aren't. Every time I processed payroll accurately when I could have cut corners, every time I told a client something they didn't want to hear because it was true, those weren't grand gestures. They were just small, consistent choices. And they compounded over time the same way that CD compounded. Quietly, without anyone noticing, until one day the number was real. And Anita, I want to say something about Anita because this story doesn't end the way it does without her. She asked me a simple question over diner coffee on a Friday afternoon, and that question led me to a Pittsburgh bank branch and a form my father had filled out before I could walk. Intelligence isn't just what you know. It's knowing what questions to ask and being present enough to actually ask them. She taught me that. The scholarship exists because I believe what happened to me should happen to fewer people. Not the hard part. The hard part is actually useful, I think. But the part where you're alone with no resources and no one showing you the door is open, that part is just waste. If I can shorten that stretch for one person a year, I will. My father named me on that account because he knew something. He knew that the people around him could be managed and arranged and appeased, but that his daughter would have to rely on herself. He wasn't wrong. I think he would be okay with how it turned out. The watch still runs, I still wear it. And on Friday afternoons, if the work allows, I still go to the diner.